What if everything you've ever admired, success, power, influence, was built not on authenticity, but on emotional emptiness? What if the most impressive people in your life, the leaders, the creators, the ones who always seem in control, weren't driven by passion or empathy or even ambition, but by something colder, something more calculated? And here's the most unsettling question of all. What if they're not just out there, but you've already let one into your life? A friend, a boss, a partner, or worse, what if slowly, unknowingly, you're becoming one of them? Hey, everyone, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, buckle up. You've landed on a place where we don't just talk about psychology, philosophy, or the human condition, we dismantle it, piece by piece, and look underneath. Today's topic is one of the darkest, most fascinating truths about human behavior, and one of the most misunderstood psychological profiles in existence. We're diving deep into the tragedy of the Machiavellian. Yes, the one who always wins, but loses themselves. The one who controls every room they walk into, but can't control the emptiness inside. The one who rises to the top, but can't feel anything when they get there. In this video, we're not just unpacking their mind, we're unmasking it. No filters, no sympathy, no demonization either. Just a brutal, honest look at how some of the most successful people in the world are quietly the loneliest, most emotionally bankrupt souls you'll ever meet. And by the end, we'll ask the question no one wants to answer. Is it worth it? Now, before we dive in, I want to ask you something important. If this kind of content resonates with you, if you love peeling back the layers of personality, power, and emotional depth, please take a moment to like this video. It's free, and it helps more than you can imagine. Share it with someone who's ever dealt with a manipulator, or maybe even someone who's been told they're too emotionally distant. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, not just because it's what YouTubers say, but because on this channel, we go deeper every single week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Also, if you want to support this kind of long-form, thought-provoking content, consider clicking the super thanks button right below this video. Your donation helps keep this channel going, and more importantly, tells the algorithm that content like this matters. This isn't just a story. This is an autopsy of the soul. The cost of success, the price of detachment, the emotional death behind the professional rise. So take a breath. Let's go there together. What if success hides a monster? It's a question that pierces through the glossy surface of modern ambition and lands deep in the human psyche. We live in a world that celebrates winners. The charismatic CEO, the visionary political leader, the magnetic influencer, these are the icons we are taught to admire. But what if the very traits that bring them to the top, their precision, charm, composure, and drive, are not rooted in passion, purpose, or compassion, but in emotional detachment, strategic coldness, and a complete inability to truly care? What if the glow of success is not light at all, but a well-constructed mask concealing something far more unsettling? This is where the idea of Machiavellianism comes in. It's not just a buzzword thrown around to describe someone manipulative. It's a psychological trait backed by research, observed in powerful people, and deeply intertwined with how society rewards ambition. Named after Niccolò Machiavelli, a 16th century political thinker whose book The Prince advocated ruthless strategy over moral purity, the term evolved over centuries. In modern psychology, it describes a specific kind of person, someone cold, calculating, and relentlessly strategic, who values power over people, influence over integrity. We've all met someone like this, even if we didn't realize it at the time. They're not loud or boastful like narcissists. They're not impulsively dangerous like psychopaths. They are quiet operators, intelligent, patient, and dangerously aware of how to twist perception. You'll meet them in office politics, in boardrooms, in romantic relationships, in your group of friends. Sometimes you'll vote for them. Sometimes you'll fall in love with them. And by the time you realize they were using you, it's already too late. Take a moment to think about someone universally admired, let's say Steve Jobs. Brilliant? No doubt. Visionary? Absolutely. But by many accounts, he was also emotionally distant, controlling, and manipulative. Former colleagues often described him as a reality distortion field, a man who could convince people to see the world his way, even if it meant bending the truth. Was Jobs a Machiavellian? We can't diagnose the dead, but the traits are eerily aligned. Let's bring it closer. Imagine you're working in a competitive company. There's a colleague, let's call him Dan. Dan is always calm, always smiling, always helpful. But somehow, when promotions happen, he always lands on top. When there's a conflict, he's never blamed. People like him, even admire him, but nobody knows him. Over time, you realize something disturbing. Dan doesn't have friends. He has allies. He doesn't share his struggles. He collects yours. And eventually you understand, Dan never cared about the team, the mission, or you. He only cared about winning. That's the essence of Machiavellianism. It's not just being smart. It's using intelligence to manipulate emotions, perceptions, and outcomes without remorse. The Machiavellian doesn't just want to succeed. They want to control the entire game. And they're willing to wear any mask it takes to get there. What makes this personality type so dangerous isn't just their manipulative nature, it's their self-control. While a narcissist might explode under criticism, and a psychopath might act recklessly, a Machiavellian remains composed. Every word they say is calculated. Every move is premeditated. They are, in a way, psychological snipers, hidden, precise, and effective. Now let's step back and ask, why do we admire these people? Because they don't appear threatening. In fact, they appear charming. Studies have shown that Machiavellians often have higher cognitive empathy. They can read others' emotions very well. But they lack effective empathy, the ability to feel those emotions themselves. That's what allows them to mirror your expressions, tell you exactly what you want to hear, and make you feel seen. But beneath that, there is no emotional connection. They are actors in a play where your trust is the script and your downfall is the applause. The tragedy is that we, as a society, reward these traits. We mistake cold confidence for competence. We confuse manipulation with leadership. When someone appears unshaken by crisis, always in control, always saying the right thing, we call them strong. But maybe strength isn't the absence of emotion. Maybe it's the presence of it and the courage to show it. The Machiavellian disagrees. To them, emotion is a weakness, a distraction, a liability. Love is leverage. Kindness is currency. Morality is an illusion useful only when it serves their goals. You see this in politics all the time. A politician might speak passionately about justice, equality, or compassion. But behind closed doors, every move is about optics, power consolidation, and strategic silence. They shake hands with the poor for the photo op, not for the person. They advocate for peace while authorizing drone strikes. It's not hypocrisy, it's Machiavellian strategy. Truth for them is not about what's real. It's about what works. And yet they rise. They lead countries, run companies, inspire millions. Why? Because they understand a painful truth. People don't always want the truth. They want the feeling of certainty, the appearance of strength, the illusion of order. And the Machiavellian is more than willing to provide that at a cost. But make no mistake, this personality type pays a price too. Because beneath the controlled exterior is a hollow core. They cannot love, not truly. They may have families, spouses, children, but those relationships are often transactional. They may understand affection, but they don't feel it. And in moments of silence, when the applause fades and the mask slips, they're left with nothing but power and the chilling realization that it doesn't fill the void. You see, the Machiavellian wins the game, but loses the self. In some ways, they're the loneliest people in the room, not because they're isolated, but because connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is a language they never learned to speak. It's not that they refuse to care. It's that they're incapable of caring. There's a term for this, alexithymia, a condition marked by emotional blindness. It's often seen in those with trauma, neglect, or emotionally barren upbringings. It doesn't excuse their behavior, but explains their armor. So when you meet someone who seems too smooth, too polished, too in control, ask yourself, what lies behind that mask? Is it wisdom, or is it a void? It's important to be careful here. Not every successful person is Machiavellian. Not every leader who hides emotion is hollow. But if we don't learn to spot the difference between charisma and manipulation, we will keep putting masks in power and wonder why the world feels colder. In personal life, too, the damage is real. A Machiavellian partner may sweep you off your feet. They'll listen, mirror your dreams, adapt to your values. But slowly, you'll start to feel confused. Your boundaries will blur. Your confidence will shrink. You'll question your own judgment. That's not love, it's emotional strategy. And by the time you realize you're a pawn, the board is already reset. There's a reason so many people leave toxic relationships saying, "I don't even recognize myself anymore." That's not an accident. That's design. That's the game they play, and they're very, very good at it. So how do we protect ourselves? We start by changing what we admire. We begin to value honesty over image, vulnerability over perfection, depth over shine. We learn that charisma without conscience is not leadership, it's theater. And we teach our children not just to succeed, but to feel, to connect, to care. Because a world built by Machiavellians may run efficiently, but it will never be truly human. In the end, the mask of power is not the problem. We all wear masks sometimes. The problem is when the mask becomes the face, when the performance becomes the personality, when success becomes a substitute for self. And so, we return to the question, what if success hides a monster? Maybe it's time to stop clapping for the show and start listening for the silence behind it. When we talk about Machiavellianism today, it's often shorthand for describing someone manipulative, cunning, or power-obsessed. But the real story begins far earlier before psychological traits, personality scales, or workplace politics back in the blood-soaked political battlegrounds of Renaissance Italy. To understand what Machiavellianism really means, we have to go back to one man, Niccolò Machiavelli. Born in 1469 in Florence, Machiavelli wasn't just a philosopher. He was a diplomat, a civil servant, and a political survivor. He lived in a time of constant upheaval. States rose and fell like the tides. Popes commanded armies. Betrayals were a daily affair, and survival meant mastering power like a weapon. In that world, traditional morality, honesty, loyalty, compassion was often a liability, not a virtue. It was during this chaotic time that Machiavelli wrote his most famous and controversial book, The Prince, il Principe. Published in 1532, 5 years after his death, it wasn't a guide to ethical leadership, it was a manual for how rulers could seize and hold power by any means necessary. Machiavelli advised princes to be feared rather than loved if they couldn't be both. He encouraged deception when it served political ends. He suggested that appearances mattered more than virtue, and that power, not purity, was the ultimate goal of leadership. Many readers were horrified. The Catholic Church banned the book. Moralists branded him evil. Even today, Machiavellian is a word that makes people uneasy. But others, especially realists, saw in his work a rare honesty. He wasn't advocating cruelty for its own sake. He was simply describing the world as it really was, not as we wished it to be. But Machiavelli was never trying to write a psychological theory. He was focused on systems, not personalities. The shift from political theory to psychological profile didn't happen until centuries later, in the 20th century, when two American psychologists, Richard Christie and Florence Geis, began to wonder, what kind of person actually lives by Machiavelli's philosophy? In the 1960s, amid the rise of social psychology, Christie and Geis designed a test called the Mach 4 scale, a questionnaire that could measure how Machiavellian a person was based on agreement with statements like, "The best way to handle people is to tell them what they want to hear," or "Anyone who completely trusts anyone else is asking for trouble." The higher someone scored, the more likely they were to manipulate others for personal gain, hide their true motives, and prioritize results over ethics. This was a radical shift. Machiavellianism was no longer just about kings and politics. It was about people. Your boss, your neighbor, your best friend's charming new boyfriend, anyone could have Machiavellian traits. The idea went from a political playbook to a psychological personality construct. Eventually, psychologists grouped Machiavellianism into a now famous trio of toxic traits called the Dark Triad, along with narcissism and psychopathy. These three traits overlap in disturbing ways. All three involve a lack of empathy, a willingness to exploit others, and a deep disregard for morality. But they differ in crucial areas that define how each operates. Narcissists crave admiration. They're grandiose, often entitled, and deeply sensitive to criticism. They need to be the center of attention and are constantly seeking validation. Think of someone like Jordan Belfort in The Wolf of Wall Street, or real-life examples like Kanye West. Brilliant, charismatic, but often wrapped up in their own myth. Psychopaths, on the other hand, are more dangerous. They're impulsive, fearless, and prone to risky behavior. They might engage in violent acts, break rules without guilt, and lack almost any sense of conscience. They don't necessarily crave attention, they just don't care about consequences. TV shows like Dexter or characters like Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men come to mind. Cold, detached, and dangerous. But Machiavellians are different. They don't need applause like narcissists. They don't act on impulse like psychopaths. They're calm, calculated, and terrifyingly strategic. They can smile while they manipulate, lie without blinking, and slowly bend entire systems to their will, not because they're out of control, but because they're entirely in control. If narcissists are flashy and psychopaths are reckless, then Machiavellians are patient chess players, always 3 steps ahead. One of the reasons Machiavellianism stands out in the Dark Triad is because it often flies under the radar. A narcissist may reveal themselves quickly through arrogance. A psychopath might leave a trail of chaos. But a Machiavellian? They blend in. They wear the right clothes, say the right things, and present themselves as model citizens. They don't want your admiration, they want your compliance. Take Frank Underwood from House of Cards. He's a textbook Machiavellian. He's not ruled by emotion. He doesn't act out of rage or ego. He calculates every move with surgical precision, using charm, threats, deception, and strategy to gain power. He doesn't care if you like him. He cares that you obey him. And he doesn't break the rules, he rewrites them. What makes Machiavellians especially effective and frightening is that they often succeed. Studies have found that high-Mach individuals are more likely to rise in corporate hierarchies, especially in environments that reward results over ethics. They know how to manipulate office politics, present an ideal image, and align themselves with power. In fact, many of the most successful people in high-stakes industries, law, politics, finance, exhibit moderate to high Machiavellian traits. Does that mean everyone who's successful is Machiavellian? Of course not. But it does raise a hard question. Are we, as a society, rewarding cold strategy over genuine character? Because here's the thing, Machiavellianism isn't always obvious. It hides behind manners, smiles, polished resumes, and inspirational quotes. It uses kindness as currency. It plays the long game. A Machiavellian can spend months gaining your trust just to use you when it matters. And once you're no longer useful, they vanish without guilt, without closure, even in personal relationships. This plays out in subtle ways. A Machiavellian partner may not be abusive in the traditional sense. They might never raise their voice or cheat or lie overtly. Instead, they'll shape your choices, control your options, and create invisible chains. You'll start feeling like you're constantly making compromises, but you won't know why. You'll feel confused, emotionally exhausted, maybe even a little paranoid. That's not weakness. That's the effect of long-term, strategic manipulation. So why do some people become Machiavellian? Research suggests both genetic and environmental factors. Some people may have a natural tendency toward emotional detachment. Others may develop these traits as survival mechanisms, especially in harsh or toxic environments where vulnerability is punished. Imagine growing up in a home where love is conditional, trust is constantly betrayed, and manipulation is modeled by authority figures. In such a world, Learning to be strategic isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation. But over time, those behaviors calcify. What began as defense becomes identity. The child who learned not to trust becomes the adult who can't connect. The teenager who used charm to survive becomes the manager who uses it to climb. And the line between survival and strategy disappears. In this way, Machiavellianism is less about villainy and more about adaptation. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. Understanding, it helps us recognize the signs in others and sometimes in ourselves. We might even ask, is a little Machiavellianism necessary? In moderation, traits like strategic thinking, emotional regulation, and persuasive skill can be valuable. Leaders need vision. Entrepreneurs need grit. Parents need patience. But the difference lies in intent. A healthy person uses strategy to serve others. A Machiavellian uses others to serve strategy. That's why psychologists don't consider Machiavellianism a mental illness. Unlike narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, Machiavellianism is not classified as a pathology. It's a personality style. That makes it even harder to detect and harder to challenge. And that brings us to the cultural moment we're living in. Today's world values optimization, performance, and influence. Social media rewards image over authenticity. Workplaces reward results over well-being. Politics rewards loyalty over truth. In such a climate, Machiavellianism doesn't just survive, it thrives. But maybe that's also why we need to understand it more than ever. Not to demonize people, but to develop sharper emotional intelligence. To teach young people that leadership isn't about manipulation. That empathy isn't weakness. That power without humanity is just theater. Because the real danger of Machiavellianism isn't just in individuals, it's in systems. When entire institutions are built on cold strategy and compassion is sidelined as inefficient, we create a world where masks become norms and authenticity becomes rebellion. Machiavelli once wrote, "The ends justify the means." But maybe it's time we asked, what kind of ends are worth sacrificing the soul for? In the 16th century, that question birthed a philosophy. In the 20th century, it became a psychological model. In the 21st century, it lives among us not just in leaders and influencers, but in the quiet decisions we make every day. Will we play the game or change the rules? The Machiavellian personality is one of the most complex and unsettling profiles in modern psychology. Not because it's loud or violent, but because it's subtle, strategic, and deeply controlled. Unlike narcissists who crave the spotlight or psychopaths who chase chaos, Machiavellians are content to operate in the shadows, quietly shaping outcomes, steering conversations, and rewriting the rules to suit their long-term goals. They're not breakers of rules in the traditional sense. They are benders of reality. That's what makes them so difficult to spot, and even harder to stop. At the core of a Machiavellian personality are three dominant traits: high strategy, high self-control, and emotional detachment. Everything they do is filtered through the lens of utility. What's the outcome? And how does this help me get there? They don't waste time reacting emotionally or seeking approval. They're less interested in whether you like them, and more interested in whether you'll listen to them, follow them, or be useful to them. It's not just about being smart, it's about weaponizing intelligence, often with chilling precision. Machiavellians are known for being cognitively sharp. Many possess a high IQ. They're typically quick learners, capable planners, and incredibly good at reading people. But they often score low on emotional intelligence, especially the kind of empathy that allows one to feel others' pain or understand emotional nuance in a sincere way. They can identify what you're feeling and use it, but they rarely share those feelings. It's as if they're fluent in a language they never truly believe in. They can mimic warmth, mimic care, even mimic vulnerability, but only as a strategy, not as a truth. This makes them remarkably different from narcissists. A narcissist needs you to notice them. Their identity is built on being admired. They need applause, recognition, validation. When they walk into a room, they want people to look. If they post online, they check the likes. They often talk about themselves and believe their greatness is self-evident. But Machiavellians don't need an audience. They need influence. They're happy to let someone else take the credit, so long as they hold the power behind the curtain. While the narcissist plays king, the Machiavellian plays the kingmaker. They also differ sharply from psychopaths. Psychopaths are impulsive, reckless, and sometimes overtly dangerous. They tend to act without regard for consequences. They can be aggressive, even violent, and they often lack any form of fear or guilt. Machiavellians, by contrast, are planners. They don't want to burn the system down, they want to take it over. They're not driven by sudden emotions or destructive urges. They weigh outcomes carefully and often avoid direct confrontation unless it benefits them strategically. If a psychopath robs a bank with a gun, a Machiavellian becomes the bank manager and rewrites the lending rules in their favor. They don't chase the thrill of chaos. They chase the stability of control. You'll often find Machiavellians in leadership roles not because they push to the front, but because they build quiet coalitions behind the scenes. They're the kind of people who know who to flatter, who to ignore, and who to eliminate from their path. They don't need to scream their ambition. They position themselves with surgical calm, using charm where needed and silence where strategic. Their charisma is often understated, even mysterious. People trust them not because they're trustworthy, but because they seem competent and emotionally composed. They project strength without arrogance, warmth without closeness. Consider an office setting. There's always that one person cool-headed, articulate, helpful, always in the right place at the right time. They never seem rattled. They rarely gossip. They avoid drama. Colleagues describe them as professional, mature, focused. But over time, you realize they always get what they want. Promotions, resources, influence. And if someone stands in their way, that person quietly fades into the background, passed over for a project, reassigned, or subtly discredited. No one can prove anything. No one even notices it happening. But it happens, and it happens often. That's the Machiavellian at work, not through brute force, but through strategic alignment. In personal relationships, the same patterns emerge. A Machiavellian partner can appear ideal, at first attentive, interested, even romantic. But something feels a little off. They're the lack of genuine vulnerability. The connection doesn't deepen. When conflict arises, they don't blow up or cry. They stay calm. Too calm. Arguments feel like negotiations, not expressions of feeling. And slowly, you begin to sense that your emotions are being managed, not embraced. Your opinions are being shaped. Your reactions are being used. You're not with someone who wants to know you. You're with someone who wants to mold you. This emotional detachment is their strength, but also their greatest weakness. Because while they may succeed in business, politics, or negotiations, they often fail in intimacy. They can form alliances but struggle with true connection. They may have families, but those relationships often carry a transactional quality. They might show affection, but only when it serves a purpose. They might say, "I love you," but only when those words achieve a goal. Over time, those close to them begin to feel like tools, or worse, like pawns. And yet, they rarely feel guilt. Not because they're evil in a comic book sense, but because their internal world doesn't work the way most people's do. They don't measure right and wrong through empathy. They measure through effectiveness. If something works, it's good. If it backfires, it's bad. Morality is flexible. Truth is a tool. Loyalty is conditional. And feelings? Feelings are data points. Now, you might wonder, are all Machiavellians inherently dangerous? Not always. Some operate within moral boundaries. They may be strategic, but they still respect certain values. They may manipulate, but not maliciously. What separates a high-functioning Machiavellian from a destructive one is the presence or absence of a personal ethical code. If a Machiavellian has boundaries, they can become incredibly effective leaders, negotiators, or advisors. They stay calm under pressure. They don't take things personally. They know how to motivate others. But if those same traits are wielded without ethics, the result is cold exploitation, often invisible until it's too late. And that's the unsettling part. Machiavellians often don't look like villains. They look like mentors, like partners, like leaders. They blend in, often admired for their discipline and clarity. They rise in companies, in governments, in social circles. They don't crash and burn, they ascend. But they leave a trail behind them. People who feel used, confused, discarded. The truth is, their greatest weapon is believability. Because they don't lie like the rest of us. Most people lie clumsily, flinching, hesitating, over-explaining. But Machiavellians lie with ease. Their lies are woven into plausible truths. They say just enough to sound honest. Their expressions match their words. Their eyes don't shift, and they believe their own spin, at least for the moment they need to. This believability makes them dangerous not just in relationships, but in public life. In politics, a Machiavellian may appear moderate, balanced, and practical. They may promise reform, appeal to common sense, and avoid emotional extremes. But behind the scenes, they build power by suppressing dissent, rewarding loyalty over merit, and undermining institutions for their own gain. Because they're not interested in democracy, they're interested in domination. Not through force, but through systems. In the corporate world, they may lead companies with discipline and results. But they may also create cultures of fear, stifle creativity, and reward obedience over innovation. Because control matters more than collaboration. Outcomes matter more than well-being. The team becomes a means to an end. And yet, many of them are rewarded, promoted, celebrated. Why? Because we confuse composure with character. We assume that someone who's calm must be kind, that someone who's confident must be competent, that someone who doesn't show emotion must be wise. But that's not always true. Sometimes, that calm is not peace, it's calculation. Sometimes, that confidence is not self-belief, it's detachment. Sometimes, that charisma is not connection, it's camouflage. Machiavellians know how to shape perception. They know what people want to hear. They know how to mimic values, align with trends, and sell sincerity. But underneath, their loyalty is to one thing, the end game. Power, position, control. And once they reach it, they rarely stop. Because the goalpost always moves. There's always another advantage to gain, another rival to neutralize, another system to bend. They may seem successful from the outside, but they often live without peace. Because control is addictive. And the more they have, the more they fear losing it. In the end, the Machiavellian doesn't just bend reality for others. They bend it for themselves. They convince themselves that manipulation is necessary. That detachment is strength. That emotions are noise. But in doing so, they cut themselves off from the very things that make life rich: trust, intimacy, compassion, joy. They win the game, but they lose the meaning. And while they may never admit it, that loss haunts them in quiet moments. In relationships that don't last. In children who feel distant. In success that feels strangely hollow. Because no matter how high you climb, if you can't feel the view, you're still alone at the top. So yes, Machiavellians are masters of strategy. They're composed, clever, and often charismatic. But they're also deeply guarded, emotionally distant, and dangerously focused. They see life not as a story, but as a series of moves. And everyone around them is either a piece on the board or an obstacle to remove. Understanding them helps us protect ourselves, but it also helps us look inward. Because in a world that often rewards control over compassion, maybe the most radical thing we can do is feel and feel deeply. Manipulation is the true signature of a Machiavellian. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It moves like smoke, quiet, unseen, yet pervasive. Where others use force, fear, or emotional outbursts to get their way, the Machiavellian uses thought, calculation, subtlety. They don't need to shout. They don't need to fight. Why use violence, after all, when you can use the mind? Their strength lies not in their physical dominance, but in their psychological precision. They study people the way a chess master studies the board, always calculating, always positioning, always several moves ahead. At its core, manipulation is about control without consent. It's steering someone's choices while letting them think they're in control. It's getting what you want without appearing to want it. A Machiavellian doesn't just lie, they reshape reality. They reframe situations, redefine boundaries, and redirect attention until others act against their own best interests while feeling like they made a completely rational choice. One of the most common ways this plays out is through emotional exploitation. A Machiavellian learns what makes you tick: your fears, your needs, your insecurities. They listen intently, not because they care, but because they're gathering data. They notice the tone of your voice when you're nervous, the way your face shifts when you're unsure, the topics that make you open up or shut down. Then they use that knowledge to guide your emotions, sometimes with compliments, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with carefully timed silence. They know exactly when to show empathy and when to pull it away. It's not just manipulation, it's engineering an emotional environment. Take relationships. A Machiavellian partner doesn't start with overt control. They start by becoming everything you ever wanted. They mirror your values, your language, your desires. If you're spiritual, they talk about the universe. If you're ambitious, they talk about vision. If you love adventure, they suddenly want to travel. In the beginning, it feels magical. Finally, someone who gets you. But what's really happening is they're building a persona that reflects your ideal. It's not real connection. It's mirroring. This mirroring is one of the most effective tools in the Machiavellian's arsenal. It builds fast trust. It makes people feel seen and understood. But it's a performance. And like all performances, it has an end. Once trust is secured and loyalty established, the manipulation begins to shift. Decisions become imbalanced. Guilt is used as leverage. Emotional withdrawal becomes punishment. You find yourself apologizing for things you didn't do, just to keep the peace. You start doubting your own instincts. You feel confused, disoriented, isolated. And that's exactly where they want you: off balance, dependent, malleable. In business, the same dynamic plays out on a different scale. A Machiavellian leader might begin as the perfect employee: calm, competent, collaborative. They win people over with charm and reliability. But behind the scenes, they're positioning themselves. They align with power, distance themselves from risk, and slowly remove competitors, not with confrontation, but with whispers. A missed email here, a suggestion of concerns there, a well-timed compliment to the right executive. Over time, others start to fade while they rise. Not because they're the most talented, but because they're the most strategic. Let's take the case of a fictional CEO named Daniel. Though his story echoes many real-world examples, Daniel starts at a company as a mid-level manager. He's quiet, efficient, respectful. He doesn't draw much attention, but people like him. He's helpful, always remembers birthdays, volunteers for projects, and never seems flustered. What they don't see is that Daniel has identified the 3 most powerful decision-makers in the company, and he's studying them like case files. Their values, their weak spots, their grudges, their rivalries. He begins to align his work with their interests. If one executive is passionate about innovation, Daniel starts championing innovation. If another is concerned about company culture, Daniel becomes a voice for employee engagement. If the third values loyalty, Daniel makes sure they feel supported. He never contradicts them in meetings. He never takes credit unless it's already been handed to him. Slowly, the higher-ups begin to trust him, not because he's shown leadership, but because he's reflected theirs. Meanwhile, Daniel subtly undermines his competitors. He never criticizes them directly. Instead, he asks concerned questions during meetings. "I'm not sure Jane's project is on track. Do you think she might be overwhelmed?" He sends polite emails that CC the right people, just following up on this task, since it seems to have slipped through. He builds alliances with junior staff, offering mentorship and favors, so that when needed, he can call in loyalty like currency. By the time the CEO retires, Daniel is the obvious replacement. He's not the loudest, not the most innovative, but he's the most trusted. And trust, when manufactured well, is a powerful currency. This type of strategic maneuvering is why Machiavellians prefer white-collar crimes. They don't rob banks with guns. They rewrite contracts, exploit tax loopholes, falsify reports, embezzle funds. It's clean. It's quiet, and it's far more scalable. You can only rob one person at a time with violence. But with manipulation, you can rob thousands of money, time, belief, autonomy. Take the case of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, a real-life example that became a global cautionary tale. Holmes built a billion-dollar company on promises that her technology could perform comprehensive blood tests with a single drop. The science never worked, but her ability to manipulate perception did. She dressed like Steve Jobs, spoke with certainty, and recruited high-profile names to her board. Investors poured in. Media celebrated her. Employees feared her. And all the while, the lie grew. It wasn't just about ambition. It was about control of narrative, of people, of truth. Holmes mirrored what people wanted to believe a young, brilliant female founder changing the world. And in doing so, she bought time. Time to lie, to deceive, to manipulate. It eventually unraveled, but not before billions were lost, reputations destroyed, and trust eroded. That's the damage manipulation can cause when paired with strategy and ambition. In friendships, manipulation often looks like guilt-tripping, passive-aggressiveness, or selective honesty. A Machiavellian friend might be the one who always has a crisis when you're doing well, who always needs you just when you're pulling away, who remembers every favor they've done, but none you've done in return. They don't blow up or lash out. They wear you down with subtle pressure, with silence that punishes, with compliments that control, with love that feels conditional. You stay because you feel responsible. You give because you feel guilty. But deep down, you sense that the friendship is not a place of mutual growth, it's a game of quiet dominance. The effectiveness of Machiavellian manipulation lies in its deniability. You can't accuse someone of doing something you can't prove. There's no yelling, no threats, just questions, suggestions, coincidences. And that's what makes it so dangerous. It erodes trust slowly, until the person being manipulated begins to question their own judgment. Psychologists call this gaslighting, a tactic Machiavellians use with alarming frequency. It involves distorting facts to make someone doubt their memory, perception, or sanity. I never said that. You're overreacting. That's not what happened. Over time, the target begins to feel insecure, unstable, even crazy. And once someone loses faith in their own mind, they become easier to control. So how can you spot Machiavellian manipulation before it's too late? Look for patterns, not moments. Are you constantly confused after conversations with this person? Do you feel emotionally drained around them? Do you question yourself more than you used to? Do you find yourself doing things you never intended to do, just to avoid their disappointment? These are signs of manipulation, not from weakness on your part, but from strategy on theirs. It's also helpful to look at consistency. Manipulators are often inconsistent in private versus public. They may be warm and supportive in front of others, but cold and controlling behind closed doors. They may shift blame skillfully, always making others feel at fault while they remain untouchable. Ultimately, manipulation is not about brilliance, it's about intent. Many people are smart, observant, persuasive. That doesn't make them dangerous. What makes someone dangerous is using those traits to control, deceive, and exploit. The Machiavellian doesn't manipulate because they have to. They do it because they believe it's more efficient, more elegant, more powerful. But in chasing that power, they sacrifice something essential: connection, trust, truth. And while they may reach the top of the ladder, they often find themselves there alone, surrounded by people who admire them, but don't love them, who obey them, but don't believe in them. Because you can manipulate your way into power, but you can't manipulate your way into peace. He listens when you speak. He looks into your eyes when you cry. He remembers the small details: your favorite band, your mother's name, the way you take your coffee. He nods, empathizes, touches your shoulder at the right time. He seems perfect, but something doesn't add up. After a while, you start to feel strange, like you're the only one emotionally invested, like your feelings go somewhere and disappear. There's no warmth coming back, only reflection. He says he cares, but it never feels like he does. He says he loves you, but it doesn't reach the heart. That's not your imagination. That's emotional detachment. That's the void behind the mask. This is the hallmark of a high-functioning Machiavellian. The illusion of connection without the substance of it. They can mimic compassion, rehearse empathy, and perform affection like a seasoned actor. But they don't feel it. Not the way most people do. There's a disconnect, not because they're broken in an obvious way, but because they experience emotion differently. That disconnect has a name in psychology: alexithymia. Alexithymia is a condition where individuals struggle to identify and describe emotions both in themselves and in others. It doesn't mean they're unfeeling. It means their emotional processing is impaired. They can intellectually recognize that someone is sad, angry, anxious, but they don't feel the pull of those emotions inside themselves. There's no resonance, no shared experience. It's like watching someone cry behind soundproof glass. You see it, but you don't hear it. You understand, but you don't respond emotionally. For the Machiavellian personality, this isn't just an occasional trait, it's often their baseline. What makes this so confusing in real life is that these individuals are often extremely socially skilled. They know how to behave, what to say, when to say it. They've studied people long enough to replicate emotional responses with near-perfect accuracy. They know how a loving partner is supposed to act, so they act that way. They know what grief looks like, so they mirror it. But the difference between them and a genuinely empathetic person is authenticity. The warmth doesn't reach their eyes. Their comfort doesn't feel rooted in emotion, it feels like a well-written script. This is why their relationships often feel intense at first. When you meet someone like this, you feel seen, understood, held in attention. They ask about your past, your wounds, your dreams. They never interrupt. They mirror your energy. It's magnetic. It feels like real love. But with time, the cracks begin to show. When you're hurting, they don't respond the way you expected. When you're vulnerable, they seem distant or even irritated. When you express deep emotion, they appear confused or cold. They can explain your emotions better than you can, but they don't comfort you. They don't sit with your pain. Instead, they fix, redirect, analyze, or worse, ignore. Their presence becomes emotionally hollow. You begin to feel alone, even when they're right beside you. This emotional void is not always malicious. Often, it stems from how they were shaped. Many high-Mach individuals grew up in environments where emotions were dangerous, dismissed, or used against them. A parent who punished vulnerability. A household where feelings were never talked about. A culture where emotional restraint was praised as strength. In that context, shutting down emotionally becomes a survival tactic. Over time, the brain adapts. Feelings get replaced with thoughts. Affection gets replaced with gestures. Love becomes an equation. But even if this detachment once served a purpose, it becomes a barrier in adulthood, especially in relationships. Because to love someone fully, you have to feel with them. You have to share joy, sorrow, fear, wonder. Machiavellians can go through the motions, but the feeling doesn't land. They can hold your hand during a funeral and not shed a tear. They can say, "I love you," every night and never mean it in the way you do. Consider the story of Eric and Mia, a couple who looked perfect from the outside. Eric was successful, articulate, generous. Mia was warm, expressive, and deeply intuitive. At first, Eric seemed like a dream. He remembered Mia's stories, showed up on time, made thoughtful gestures. He was the guy who cooked dinner after a long day, who cheered her on at work, who complimented her in public. But over time, Mia began to notice something missing. When she cried, he held her but didn't react. When she was excited, he smiled but never seemed thrilled. He never got angry, never got flustered, never got overwhelmed. He was steady but too steady, coldly steady. It was as if he was performing emotional support rather than feeling it. She started to test it, subtly. She shared childhood memories that usually made people cry, but he stayed blank. She opened up about fears, and he offered solutions instead of comfort. When she finally asked, "Do you feel anything when I cry?" he responded, "I know I should, but I don't. I'm here for you." Isn't that enough? That sentence broke her, because it wasn't enough. It never had been. This is the tragedy of loving someone emotionally detached. You can have consistency, presence, Even loyalty, but not warmth. Not connection. Not the kind of love that flows both ways. It becomes a performance you're both trapped in. You desperately trying to awaken something inside them. And them pretending they already feel it. In long-term relationships, this creates deep disillusionment. The partner of a Machiavellian often feels emotionally starved. They may not be abused, but they're neglected in a more silent, insidious way. Their needs are intellectually acknowledged, but not emotionally met. They feel unseen, unsupported, unloved. And the worst part is they can't explain it, because nothing overtly cruel is happening. But something essential is always missing. Over time, resentment builds. The relationship becomes transactional. Sex becomes mechanical. Communication becomes functional. There are no late-night talks, no spontaneous laughter, no emotional nudity. Just two people living parallel lives, one performing affection, the other hoping for something real. This is also why many Machiavellians cycle through relationships. They can attract people easily. They know how to charm, how to impress. But sustaining intimacy over time requires emotional reciprocity, and they simply can't provide it. Once the mask slips, once the performance becomes exhausting, they either detach or sabotage the relationship. It's easier to start over than to face emotional vulnerability. It's not uncommon to see Machiavellians remain single for long periods, or choose relationships that are more strategic than intimate relationships that serve a social image, offer financial stability, or give access to influence. In these arrangements, emotional connection is optional, sometimes even avoided. They may marry, but their partner often feels like a co-worker, not a lover. They may have children, but struggle to bond. Parenting becomes a duty, not a connection. Socially, they can seem magnetic. Their charisma is real, but it's empty. They know how to tell a good story, how to entertain, how to listen. But there's always a sense of distance, like they're behind glass. People leave conversations with them feeling impressed, even inspired, but rarely known. That's because charisma and authenticity are not the same thing. Charisma is how well someone performs in public. Authenticity is how deeply they connect in private. Machiavellians excel at the former, fail at the latter. It's important to note that this isn't about judging them as evil. Many don't choose this way of being. It's how they were shaped. In some cases, neurological factors like underactivity in the limbic system or irregularities in emotional processing centers may contribute. In others, it's learned behavior, reinforced over years. Regardless of the source, the result is the same. A person who can replicate emotion but not truly feel it. What's heartbreaking is that some Machiavellians don't even know what they're missing. They've never experienced true emotional intimacy, so they don't recognize the absence. They think showing up and doing the right things is love. They don't understand why their partners feel lonely, why people leave, why their success feels hollow, why they can't seem to hold on to real friendship. It's not just that they hurt others, it's that they live in a constant state of emotional famine. Without realizing it, they chase power, success, admiration, not because they're greedy, but because they hope those things will fill the void. But they don't. No amount of applause can replace connection. No number of followers can mimic friendship. No empire can replace a single, sincere touch. And in their quietest moments, when a room is empty and the mask comes off, they know something's wrong. They just don't have the words for it. Because that's what alexithymia robs you of, not just the feeling itself, but the language to understand it. To love deeply, to feel fully, to hurt and heal and risk vulnerability, that is the core of what makes us human. And without it, no matter how successful, admired, or powerful someone becomes, a part of them remains untouched, frozen, alone. So if you ever find yourself loving someone who seems to do all the right things but never quite reaches your heart, trust your intuition. If you feel unseen, unheld, unfelt, it's not you. It's the void. And sometimes, no amount of love can fill it from the outside. For the Machiavellian, ethics and morality are not deeply held beliefs, but adaptable tools, props in a performance meant to serve a narrative. They're not interested in being good. They're interested in being seen as good. Morality is not about internal values or integrity, it's about strategy. When a Machiavellian acts in line with moral norms, it's rarely because they believe in them. It's because doing so gives them something: approval, trust, influence, or protection. Morality is a costume they put on when it fits the part they want to play, and take off the moment it becomes inconvenient. In the public sphere, especially politics, this becomes glaringly obvious. Think of the countless political figures who champion family values on stage, only to be caught in scandals involving infidelity, abuse of power, or financial corruption. The contradiction isn't accidental, it's calculated. They know the public expects morality, so they mimic it. They talk about God, faith, loyalty, honesty, unity. They surround themselves with symbols of virtue, family photos, church visits, charity events. Not because they believe in those things, but because those things work. They sell. They protect. And when the truth leaks, when their actions no longer match their words, they don't admit guilt unless cornered. Even then, the apology is rarely about true remorse. It's a performance designed to maintain the narrative. I made a mistake, they say. I take full responsibility. They say, then shift the blame in the next sentence or bury the apology under public relations spin. Their use of morality is entirely transactional. It's like currency. They invest in it when it offers returns and drop it when the market shifts. Take the example of the 2008 political scandal involving Eliot Spitzer, former governor of New York. Spitzer built his career as a crusader against corporate crime and corruption. He portrayed himself as a man of law, order, and justice. He was called the Sheriff of Wall Street. But behind closed doors, he was engaging in the very kind of deceit he publicly condemned, soliciting high-end escorts while enforcing strict moral and legal codes on others. When the truth came out, it wasn't just the hypocrisy that shocked people, it was the clarity of the strategy. He knew morality played well. He wore the costume masterfully. And when it tore, his entire credibility crumbled. But Machiavellians aren't just in politics. You'll find them in corporate leadership, nonprofit boards, educational institutions, and even social circles. In the workplace, the Machiavellian employee might champion company values, publicly integrity, transparency, collaboration, while privately engaging in backdoor deals, credit stealing, or manipulation of others to rise up the ladder. They'll quote the employee handbook in meetings, then sabotage a colleague's project behind the scenes. They'll offer to mentor someone, not to help them, but to monitor them. Morality becomes branding. It's something to manage, like a portfolio. In social life, they're the ones who give heartfelt speeches at weddings, advocate for causes on social media, and volunteer at just the right moments, often when visibility is highest. But ask their close friends or partners, and a different picture emerges. The generosity is conditional. The kindness is calculated. The ethics evaporate the moment they're not getting something in return. And when conflict arises, they're quick to moralize. They'll say, I expected better from you, or you really let me down, using guilt as a weapon. Not because they care about moral alignment, but because it gives them leverage. What's particularly dangerous is their ability to weaponize ethics, not just to protect themselves, but to attack others. When they want to undermine someone, they don't always go for character assassination directly. They imply moral failure. They frame a co-worker's mistake as disrespect to the team. They suggest a competitor is not aligned with our values. They don't fight dirty, they fight cleverly. By positioning themselves as the moral high ground, they force others into defense. And once someone is defending their morality, the game is already lost. This tactic is especially effective in environments where image is everything: corporate PR, politics, media, academia. In these spaces, moral failure isn't just personal, it's professional suicide. Machiavellians exploit this by creating traps. They'll provoke, wait, document, and then expose. Not because they care about justice, but because it clears their path. They use the sword of morality not to protect the innocent, but to cut down their rivals. But what happens when morality no longer serves them? They drop it instantly. The same person who preached loyalty will betray you the moment your loyalty becomes a liability. The same leader who spoke about honesty will lie to save face. And they won't feel conflicted because their morality was never real, it was a tool. They may even criticize others for moral weakness while committing the same offenses. This is part of the illusion. By being vocal about ethics, they create a moral buffer. People are less likely to suspect them of wrongdoing if they're constantly championing what's right. It's a psychological trick called moral licensing. People who publicly advocate for good are often given more leeway in private. Machiavellians know this. They exploit it. In relationships, this shows up in the form of selective morality. They hold others to high standards, fidelity, honesty, responsibility, while excusing their own lapses as exceptions. It's different with me, they say. You wouldn't understand. They'll accuse their partner of selfishness while manipulating the relationship for their own gain. They'll criticize someone for being dishonest while withholding major truths. And if confronted, they'll twist the story to appear like the victim. It's not about being right, it's about winning. This moral inconsistency isn't a glitch. It's a feature. Machiavellians see the world as a series of power dynamics. Morality is just one more system to navigate, one more language to speak when needed. They may even adopt different moral codes for different audiences. Around religious people, they quote scripture. Around progressives, they speak about justice and equity. Around traditionalists, they preach family values. Not because they believe in any of it, but because they know what language opens what doors. To the Machiavellian, authenticity is irrelevant. What matters is perception. If they can appear moral, they don't need to be moral. If they can convince you they care, they don't need to care. They've mastered the optics. And in a world that often prioritizes image over integrity, they rise. But there's a deeper cost, because when someone uses morality as a costume long enough, they begin to lose the ability to tell the difference. They forget what real integrity feels like. They begin to justify everything as strategy. Every lie becomes necessary. Every betrayal becomes justified. They rationalize cruelty as discipline, indifference as maturity, manipulation as leadership. And over time, their own sense of self becomes fractured. They can no longer tell where the costume ends and the real person begins. This is why, despite their success, many Machiavellians experience deep internal emptiness. They may command respect, but rarely love. They may have followers, but rarely friends. They may own companies, but feel like imposters. Because deep down, they know the applause isn't for them, it's for the image they constructed. And for those around them, the damage is profound. Being close to a Machiavellian who uses morality as a weapon leaves people feeling confused, gaslit, and emotionally unsafe. They're constantly second-guessing themselves, wondering if they were really wrong or just made to feel that way. It creates environments of fear and silence, where people comply not out of loyalty, but out of self-preservation. So how do you protect yourself from this kind of manipulation? You start by paying attention to consistency. Is someone's public virtue matched by their private behavior? Do they speak about values, but act in contradiction to them? Are their moral judgments weaponized to control or shame others? Do they use guilt as a tool? Morality, when authentic, creates safety and trust. When weaponized, it creates fear and submission. That's the difference. In the end, true morality isn't loud. It doesn't boast or posture. It's quiet, steady, and felt over time. The Machiavellian may wear the costume well, but the fabric always frays under scrutiny. What matters is whether the person inside the costume remains when no one is watching. And for the Machiavellian, that's often the one thing they can never provide. Integrity when it's invisible. Ethics that aren't leveraged. Morality that isn't monetized. A self that is consistent even in the dark. There's a comforting simplicity in believing that people who manipulate, deceive, and emotionally harm others were just born that way. It allows us to categorize them, distance ourselves, and move on. But reality is rarely that clean. People aren't born Machiavellian. They become that way. shaped over time by the intersection of biology, environment, trauma, and culture. To understand what creates a Machiavellian mind, we have to let go of the idea of the innate monster and begin to see something more human, more unsettling, a child who adapted to survive, who grew up learning that masks protect better than vulnerability, that strategy wins more than sincerity, and that connection is dangerous unless it can be controlled. From a biological standpoint, research shows that some individuals may be predisposed to emotional detachment. Brain imaging studies suggest that Machiavellian traits can correlate with structural differences in the brain, specifically an overdeveloped prefrontal cortex paired with underactivity in regions tied to empathy and emotional processing. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for executive function planning, impulse control, long-term decision-making. People with higher activity in this region tend to be calm, focused, and good at regulating emotion. But when this is paired with lower activity in areas like the amygdala, which processes fear and empathy, or the insula, which helps us experience emotional awareness, it creates a unique psychological profile. Someone who is incredibly good at strategizing, but struggles to feel what others feel. They can read you, but they don't feel you. They can understand your pain, but it doesn't move them. They remain rational when others break. This isn't just coldness, it's neurology. But biology is never the full story. The deeper explanation lies in life experience, particularly in early childhood. Many Machiavellians were once sensitive, emotionally attuned children. But they grew up in environments that punished vulnerability. Maybe they had a parent who ignored their emotional needs or mocked their displays of affection. Maybe they experienced abuse, physical, emotional, or psychological, that taught them early on that trust is unsafe and connection is dangerous. In these settings, a child learns quickly. Expressing need leads to pain. Being open leads to rejection. And feeling too deeply is a threat to survival. So they adapt. They learn to suppress their own feelings, to observe instead of participate, to stay 3 steps ahead. They stop trying to connect and start trying to control. They become careful, calculating, hyper-aware of how others react, because reading people becomes a defense mechanism. They begin to mirror, to manipulate, to mask, not because they're evil, but because it works, because it protects them from further hurt, because it gives them some sense of power in a world that has stripped it away. Over time, these behaviors get reinforced. In school, the manipulative kid might avoid punishment better than the honest one. In a family where affection is conditional, the child who performs the right behavior gets attention. In friendships, being charming gets them acceptance, even if the charm is fake. These lessons stack up. And by the time they reach adulthood, the performance has become the personality. Culture plays a significant role, too. We live in societies that often reward outcomes over integrity. In schools, the kid who wins the debate gets the grade, not the one who tells the hard truth. In business, the leader who delivers profits is praised, even if they manipulate people to get there. In dating, confidence is often mistaken for character and charm for connection. These cultural dynamics create systems where Machiavellian traits thrive. When ruthlessness is mistaken for strength, when detachment is mistaken for wisdom, and when emotional manipulation is mistaken for leadership, the Machiavellian becomes the ideal archetype: polished, effective, untouchable. Now imagine a boy named Aaron. He's born into a household where love is inconsistent. His father is stern and rarely speaks. His mother is emotionally volatile, sometimes affectionate, sometimes cruel. Aaron learns not to rely on anyone. He becomes quiet, observant. He studies people instead of trusting them. At school, he notices that if he flatters the teacher, he gets better treatment. If he tells kids what they want to hear, they accept him. If he hides his feelings, he doesn't get hurt. So he builds a mask. He becomes the boy who says the right thing, acts the right way, but always holds back. Years pass. Aaron becomes a man. He excels in school, then in business. He knows how to talk to anyone. He's likable, calm, professional. But his relationships never last. He gets close, then withdraws. He listens, but never really opens up. He can comfort others, but never connect. And when conflict arises, he doesn't fight or flee, he calculates. He figures out what narrative will make him look best, and he leans into it. He's not trying to hurt people. He just doesn't know another way to exist. Aaron isn't rare. He's a type of person shaped by 1,000 cuts, by parents who couldn't model emotional safety, by schools that rewarded image over honesty, by a world that told him to win first and feel later. The Machiavellian personality is not simply a character flaw. It's often a response to chronic emotional malnourishment, to a childhood where real emotion was a liability and success was the only path to worth. This is where the line between villain and victim blurs. Because yes, Machiavellians can do great harm. Their manipulation leaves scars, their detachment creates emptiness, their control damages relationships. But behind all of it is often a person who was never taught how to love, how to trust, or how to feel safe just being themselves. They learned to survive, not to connect. And now, survival is all they know. The tragedy is that many Machiavellians never question their way of being. They see results, so they assume the method works. They get promotions, praise, power. They build reputations, but they don't build closeness. They're surrounded by people, but remain alone. They may crave connection, but don't know how to sustain it. They may mimic love, but never fully feel it. They succeed in the world's eyes, but lose something essential along the way. And unless something disrupts that pattern, deep introspection, therapy, or a relationship that holds up a mirror, they may never realize what's missing. They may go their entire lives optimizing for control while starving for connection. That's the real cost of becoming Machiavellian, not just the harm they cause, but the humanity they miss out on. It's tempting to judge these individuals harshly, especially if we've been hurt by one. But understanding their origins doesn't mean excusing their actions. It means recognizing that healing is complex. It means asking not just what's wrong with you, but also what happened to you. It means seeing manipulation not as pure malice, but sometimes as misguided protection. It means realizing that behind the mask is not always a monster, but often a scared child who grew up believing masks were the only way to survive. The hope lies in that realization, because what is learned can also be unlearned. What was once adaptive can be released, but only if the person is willing to stop playing the game long enough to feel what they've been running from. Only if they can risk shedding the armor. Only if they believe that it's possible to win a different kind of battle, the one for their own emotional truth. Until then, they will continue to function, succeed, manipulate. But they will do so from a place of emptiness, always running, always performing, always protecting something fragile that was never nurtured in the first place. And for those who encounter them, the challenge is this: stay discerning, not naive, compassionate, not complicit, strong enough to set boundaries, but wise enough to know that even those who hurt us were once hurting too. The Machiavellian often reaches the summit. From the outside, they're everything society praises: successful, composed, powerful, respected. They move with certainty in rooms filled with uncertainty. Their words are persuasive, their presence commanding. They earn promotions, build empires, attract admiration. But beneath the sleek surface, behind the titles and the achievements, lies a quiet truth that rarely gets spoken. They're deeply, profoundly alone. He wins every battle but loses his soul. This isn't poetic exaggeration. It's a psychological reality. Machiavellians, by design, sacrifice genuine connection in favor of control. Their relationships are strategic, their emotions managed, their vulnerabilities buried. They can't afford to trust fully because trust is unpredictable. They can't allow themselves to be truly known because authenticity creates risk. And without emotional intimacy, even the most glittering success starts to feel empty. They climb the ladder only to find the view is cold. The very traits that make them effective: emotional detachment, Manipulation, hyper-rationality also make it nearly impossible for them to experience true joy. Joy, after all, is messy. It's spontaneous, vulnerable, rooted in presence. Machiavellians don't live in the present. They live in anticipation. Every conversation is a move. Every compliment a tactic. Every relationship a risk to be calculated. You can't feel joy while analyzing everything through a cost-benefit lens. You can mimic happiness. You can stage the perfect life. But deep down, you know you're acting. And eventually, the performance exhausts you. They often feel this isolation most in moments that are supposed to be meaningful. A birthday celebrated in a luxury hotel, surrounded by acquaintances who benefit from their success but don't truly know them. A promotion announced in a boardroom filled with applause that doesn't warm the heart. A romantic relationship that looks good in photos but feels hollow in private. These moments should feel like victories, but for the Machiavellian, they often feel like echoes, hollow, distant, unrewarding, because without emotional resonance, even the best outcomes feel like dust. They can't bond in the way most people do. Bonding requires vulnerability, shared emotional experiences, a willingness to be seen not just as competent or charming, but as flawed, scared, real. Machiavellians avoid this at all costs. They build their lives on polished identity, not raw humanity. As a result, people like them, even admire them, but they don't know them. And the Machiavellian knows this, which makes their loneliness feel even more permanent. If people only love the version of me I perform, they wonder, does anyone really love me at all? There's a deep existential grief in that realization. They may not admit it. They may even laugh it off. But when the lights go down and no one's watching, it lingers. A kind of sorrow that doesn't cry, it just aches. They've gained power, but lost peace. They've won influence, but forfeited intimacy. And sometimes, when success no longer distracts them, they ask the inevitable question, was it worth it? This brings to mind one of the most haunting questions in philosophical tradition, often attributed to Jesus in the New Testament. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? This question cuts to the core of the Machiavellian dilemma. The soul here is not a religious concept, but a metaphor for the inner self, the part of you that feels, connects, hopes, believes. When you lose that, you haven't just lost your morality. You've lost your capacity to feel alive. In Western society, ambition is celebrated. We're taught to chase success, to optimize performance, to play to win. Hustle culture, personal branding, strategic networking, it's all geared toward achieving more, faster, with fewer emotional distractions. In this framework, the Machiavellian isn't a villain. He's a role model. The man who closes the deal. The woman who always gets the promotion. The leader who never breaks under pressure. Emotions, in this world, are often seen as liabilities. Compassion is weakness. Vulnerability is naive. But Eastern philosophy offers a different perspective. In Buddhism, for example, detachment is practiced not to escape connection, but to escape craving. It's not about controlling others, it's about mastering oneself. Taoism teaches harmony with the flow of life, not dominance over it. Confucianism emphasizes relational ethics, not transactional gain. These philosophies suggest that true power comes not from controlling the outside world, but from cultivating peace within. They teach that the self is not a weapon to sharpen, but a garden to tend. In this light, the Machiavellian's journey is tragic. He has mastered the game, but lost himself to it. He is skilled, but not wise. He is admired, but not loved. He is successful, but not fulfilled. Because all his victories are built on a foundation that excludes the very things that make life meaningful. Connection, authenticity, presence, peace. Even the Machiavellian's moments of triumph are laced with paranoia. He knows that his relationships are conditional, that his image is fragile, that the same tactics he used to rise can be used against him. Trust becomes impossible. Rest becomes rare. The mind that once served him begins to imprison him, constantly scanning for threats, always calculating. It's not a life of freedom. It's a life of quiet captivity. And perhaps the cruelest irony of all is that the Machiavellian doesn't always see the damage until it's irreversible. They may lose a partner who loved them despite the distance. They may watch a child grow up and drift away emotionally. They may build a company only to find they have no one to share it with. They may become rich only to discover they don't know what joy feels like anymore. By the time the truth hits, the habit of detachment is too ingrained. The muscles of intimacy have atrophied. The world keeps applauding, but they stop hearing it. Sometimes they attempt to reconnect. They seek therapy, retreat into spirituality, try to change. And some do, but even that is hard, because healing requires the very things they've avoided their whole lives: emotional honesty, humility, surrender. To admit you've hurt people, to admit you've hurt yourself, to feel again. That takes a kind of courage that Machiavellians are not used to calling upon. It's not the courage to conquer, but the courage to be vulnerable. For most, the path forward is not a dramatic transformation, but a slow unraveling of the armor. One honest conversation, one relationship without manipulation, one moment of silence where they don't plan their next move, they just feel it. Maybe that's the first step, not toward becoming someone else, but toward remembering who they were before they learned to perform. Until then, they will keep playing the game, and they will keep winning it. But the scoreboard will never fill the silence in their heart, because no matter how powerful you become, no matter how high you rise, no matter how flawless your image, if you cannot love, cannot trust, cannot be known, then you haven't really lived. You just performed life. And at the end of it all, when there's no one left to impress, no one left to manipulate, no more moves to make, what then? What remains when the game is over and you finally take off the mask? Maybe just this truth: master the game, but don't lose yourself to it. So here we are. We've walked through the mask. We've followed the Machiavellian to the top of their mountain through charm, calculation, detachment, and manipulation. We've seen the faces they wear, the lies they believe, and the lives they impact. But what's more chilling than the harm they cause is the emptiness they live with. Because in the end, they always win. The job, the partner, the money, the applause. But when the room is quiet, when the lights go out, when there's no one left to impress, what do they have? A hollow life, a disconnected heart, a legacy that might be powerful, but never felt. And it begs the question, the one you've probably been thinking about since the start. Is this the price of power? Is the cost of control loneliness? Can you really gain the world and not lose your soul? For thousands of years, thinkers from both the East and West have wrestled with this. In the West, we hear it in the Bible. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? In the East, we see it in Taoism and Buddhism, which tell us that mastery without peace is just another kind of suffering. So maybe the answer isn't to stop striving. Maybe the answer is to strive differently. To play the game, but play it with soul. To succeed, but stay connected. To lead, but not lose yourself in the performance. Because here's the truth. You don't need to become emotionally detached to be powerful. You don't need to manipulate to be effective. You don't need to win by suppressing your heart. In fact, the world desperately needs people who lead with both competence and compassion. People who understand strategy, but are still capable of softness. People who can rise without disconnecting from their humanity. If you're watching this and you've ever felt that pressure, to turn off your emotions just to survive, to hide your empathy so no one uses it against you, to perform strength while dying inside, let me tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly. You don't have to become the coldest version of yourself to be strong. You don't have to become Machiavellian to matter. That's not the only path. It's just the loneliest one. So if this video sparks something inside you, a memory, a person, maybe even a piece of yourself, don't leave it here. Start a conversation in the comments. Tell your story. Ask your questions. Share your thoughts. This isn't just a video, it's a space. And you are part of it. And if this resonated with you, if you want more content like this, please don't forget to like this video. It helps this message reach more people. Share it with someone who's walking that dangerous line between success and self-abandonment. Subscribe if you haven't yet. because this is just one piece of a much larger journey we're going to take together. And lastly, if you believe in the power of content that dares to go deep, that dares to ask the uncomfortable questions, click the super thanks button and consider supporting this channel. Even the smallest contribution means the world, and it tells the algorithm and the world that this conversation is worth having. Remember, power without purpose is empty. Control without compassion is hollow. Success without soul isn't success at all. So master the game. Yes, learn the rules. Play smart, but never ever lose yourself to it. Because in the end, the most valuable thing you'll ever own is still your heart. Thank you for watching. I'm honored to have you here. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay human.